I decided to start my drive from California to Oregon late at night. The highway was nearly empty, the only company being the occasional truck passing by. I was heading to Oregon for a series of business meetings, hoping the night drive would help me avoid the dreaded traffic. My name is John, a mid-level manager in a marketing firm. I'm used to long hours and late nights, but this journey felt different from the start. As I drove through the dark, desolate road, the silence was almost comforting. My thoughts wandered to the meetings ahead, the presentations I needed to perfect, and the deals I needed to close. The monotony of the drive was only broken by the hum of my car's engine and the occasional flicker of headlights from oncoming traffic. About 2 hours into my journey, I saw him for the first time. A man standing on the side of the road, dressed in a dark suit. His presence was jarring against the backdrop of the empty highway. He stood still, his gaze fixed on my car as I sped past. There was something unsettling about his posture, his expression, like he was waiting for something or someone. My grip tightened on the steering wheel, and my heart skipped a beat. I glanced in my rearview mirror, but he had already vanished into the darkness. I shook off the unease and tried to focus on the road ahead. But the image of the man lingered in my mind. I rationalized it away, blaming it on my tired eyes playing tricks on me. 15 minutes later, I saw him again. This time, he was standing near an old, abandoned gas station. The same suit, the same fixed gaze. My heart raced as I slowed the car down, curiosity getting the better of me. I pulled over and stepped out, the cool night air hitting my face. The gas station looked like it had been out of business for years, its windows broken and the sign hanging by a thread. The man was nowhere to be seen. As I walked around the car, I heard a sudden noise, a rustling sound coming from behind the station. I peered into the shadows, but there was no sign of him. A shiver ran down my spine as I hurried back into the car, locking the doors behind me. As I drove away, the sense of unease grew stronger. Who was this man, and why did he appear twice on my route? The road seemed to stretch endlessly before me, and the darkness felt oppressive. The questions swirled in my mind, each one more troubling than the last. The rest of the drive was filled with an eerie silence, broken only by the sound of my own breathing and the occasional hoot of an owl. The road seemed longer now, every mile dragging on. My mind, desperate for distraction, wandered to stories I'd heard about haunted highways and eerie encounters. My old friend Dave once told me about a ghost hitchhiker he'd seen on Route 66. At the time, we laughed it off, blaming it on his late-night drive and a few too many beers. But now, those stories felt uncomfortably close to reality. "Get a grip, John," I muttered to myself, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "You're just tired. It's nothing more than a trick of the mind." My internal dialogue was a mix of rationalization and rising panic. Was it really exhaustion playing tricks on me? Or was there something more sinister at play? The image of the man in the suit, his unwavering gaze, kept replaying in my mind. I needed to stop, to clear my head, and get some caffeine into my system. I fumbled with the radio, hoping some music might distract me, but it only made the silence feel more oppressive. I pulled into a small, dimly lit gas station, the neon sign flickering above the entrance. The place looked almost as deserted as the abandoned station I'd passed earlier, but at least it was open. I parked the car and stepped out, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. The smell of gasoline and the hum of the overhead lights were oddly comforting. Inside, a young attendant with a bored expression stood behind the counter, scrolling through his phone. I grabbed a cup of coffee, the warmth of the cup soothing my trembling hands. "Long drive?" the attendant asked, glancing up briefly. "Yeah, heading to Oregon," I replied, trying to sound casual. He nodded, uninterested, and went back to his phone. I took my coffee and stepped outside, breathing in the cool night air. I was halfway through my cup when I saw him again. The man in the suit, standing under a streetlight at the edge of the parking lot, his face partially obscured by shadows. He was watching me, just as he had before. My heart pounded in my chest, fear gripping me tighter than ever. I could feel my palms sweating, my breath quickening. "What do you want?" I whispered to the figure, though I knew he couldn't hear me. The man remained still, his presence more unnerving than any ghost story I'd ever heard. I didn't dare approach him this time. Instead, I hurried back to my car, locking the doors with shaking hands. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. It's just a coincidence, I thought, though the words felt hollow. Maybe he's just a traveler, like me. But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. The figure's persistent appearances, his silent observation, were too much to be mere chance. I needed to get back on the road to put as much distance between us as possible. As I started the engine, I noticed a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye, but when I turned to look, he was gone. As I pulled back onto the highway, my mind was racing. The coffee did little to calm my nerves or chase away the image of the man in the suit. The road stretched out before me, dark and seemingly endless. I wanted to reach my destination, but the thought of encountering the figure again filled me with dread. The primary conflict became clear. I needed to get to Oregon safely, but my growing paranoia and fear of the mysterious man were making the drive unbearable. Every shadow on the road, every flicker of headlights, made me jump. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see him sitting in the back seat, his cold eyes boring into mine. My rational mind tried to assert control. He's not real. You're just tired. Focus on driving, I told myself repeatedly. But the more I tried to dismiss the fear, the stronger it grew. My thoughts spiraled into darker places, feeding off the fear and uncertainty. What if he was real? What if he was following me? I noticed a car with its hazard lights on, pulled over to the side of the road. The driver was waving for help, but I sped past, unable to stop. I decided to pull over at a rest stop, hoping to get some sleep. The parking lot was nearly empty, the silence oppressive. I reclined my seat and closed my eyes, but the unease wouldn't let me rest. Every creak of the car, every rustle of the wind, set my nerves on edge. I kept imagining the man standing outside, watching, waiting. Just as I was about to drift off, I felt a presence. My eyes snapped open, and there he was, in the rearview mirror. The man in the suit, sitting in the back seat, staring at me with those unblinking eyes. Panic surged through me. I scrambled to unlock the door and tumbled out of the car, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I stood there in the cold night, breathing heavily, staring at the empty back seat through the open door. He was gone. Had he ever been there? My mind raced with questions, none of them comforting. I couldn't stay here. The rest I so desperately needed was out of reach. I got back in the car, locked the doors, and started the engine. I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time before pulling away, half expecting to see him again, but the back seat was empty. Sleep was no longer an option. I had to keep moving to get away from whatever was haunting me. The road ahead seemed even longer now, the darkness more suffocating. My exhaustion was mounting, but fear was a powerful motivator. I drove on, determined to reach my destination, even as every mile deepened my paranoia and fear. When I finally reached the motel, I was a wreck. My body ached from the tension, my eyes felt gritty from lack of sleep, and my mind was a jumble of fear and confusion. The check-in process was a blur, and before long, I found myself in a dimly lit room that smelled faintly of mildew. The bed looked uninviting, but I had no choice. As soon as my head hit the pillow, I fell into a restless sleep. My dreams were filled with the man in the suit, his face a constant presence. He stood at the foot of my bed, watching me with those cold, unblinking eyes. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I was trapped in a cycle of terror, unable to escape. When I finally woke up, I was drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. The line between reality and nightmare had blurred completely. I heard a noise from outside the room, a faint, eerie tapping. I tried to ignore it, but it grew louder, more insistent. I crept to the window and peeked through the curtains. There was no one there. Just as I was about to turn away, a shadow moved, and I saw him again. The man in the suit, standing by the streetlight, looking directly at me. The next morning, I felt like a shell of myself. I got dressed in a daze, trying to pull myself together for the meetings ahead. My reflection in the mirror looked haunted, dark circles under my eyes and a pallor to my skin. I drank coffee by the gallon, hoping it would jolt me into some semblance of alertness. The drive to the meeting location was uneventful, but my nerves were frayed. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the man in the suit again. When I arrived at the office, I took a deep breath and steeled myself for the day ahead. I was led into a conference room where the team was waiting. As I introduced myself, I caught sight of the meeting's host walking towards me. My blood ran cold. It was him. The man from the road, the gas station, my nightmares. He looked exactly the same, down to the suit and the piercing gaze. "Hello, John," he said, extending his hand. "I'm David, the regional manager. I've been looking forward to this meeting." I managed to shake his hand and plaster a smile on my face, but inside, I was screaming. The resemblance was uncanny. Was this just another trick of my exhausted mind? Or had I really seen him on the road? The meeting dragged on, my focus slipping in and out. Every time David spoke, I felt a shiver run down my spine. He seemed perfectly normal, professional even, but the memory of his silent apparition haunted me. When the meeting finally ended, I made my excuses and left as quickly as I could. Back in my car, I sat for a moment, trying to process everything. Had it all been a figment of my imagination, fueled by exhaustion and paranoia? Or was there something more sinister at play? As I drove away from the office, my mind still reeling, I noticed a car following me. My heart raced as I took a series of turns, trying to shake it off. When I finally lost the tail, I pulled over, breathing heavily. One thing was certain, I would never forget the man in the suit and the night that changed everything. It was a rainy October night in 2023 when everything started. I was heading home after a long day at the office. It was around 10:30 p.m. when I exited the subway station on 14th Street, Manhattan. The rain was heavy, creating puddles that reflected the city's lights, giving the whole scene an almost surreal vibe. As I walked down 6th Avenue, I noticed a man standing under the awning of a closed shop. He was wearing a long coat and a hat, which seemed odd for that time of year. As I passed by him, I felt his eyes follow me, but I decided not to give it much thought. Little did I know, that seemingly innocuous moment would turn into something that would change my life forever. I reached my building on 7th Avenue, an old but well-maintained structure. I hurried inside to escape the rain and headed straight to the elevator. Upon reaching my floor, the 12th, I noticed the door to the apartment next to mine was slightly ajar. It was strange since I knew the neighbors were away on vacation. Curious, I peeked inside and saw something that sent chills down my spine. The living room was in complete disarray, as if there had been a struggle. Before I could react, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned quickly and saw the same man from the street. He was standing in the hallway, staring at me intently. "Lost?" I asked, trying to hide my nervousness. "Actually, I've been waiting for you," he replied with a sinister smile. Back in my apartment, I couldn't shake the eerie feeling from the encounter. I tried to distract myself by watching TV, but my mind kept replaying the events of the night. I called my best friend, Alex, to talk about it. "Alex, something weird happened tonight," I began, recounting the story. "Man, that sounds creepy. You sure you're okay?" Alex's concern was palpable. "Yeah, I think so. It was just unsettling." Our conversation was cut short by a loud knock on my door. My heart raced as I approached and looked through the peephole. It was the man again. This time, he wasn't alone. There were two other figures standing behind him, their faces obscured by the dim hallway light. I took a deep breath and opened the door slightly. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to sound calm. "We need to talk," the man said, his tone now serious and devoid of the earlier sinister edge. "It's about your neighbors." As he spoke, my mind drifted back to a conversation I had with Mrs. Thompson, my elderly neighbor, a few weeks ago. She mentioned hearing strange noises at night, sounds of shuffling and whispers that seemed to come from the walls. At the time, I dismissed it as the ramblings of an old woman living alone. Now, those words echoed in my mind, mixing with the man's ominous presence at my door. I had to focus. "What about my neighbors?" I asked, trying to mask the anxiety in my voice. "They're in danger. And so are you, if you don't listen carefully." My mind raced with questions. Who was this man? Why was he here? And what did he mean by danger? I needed answers, but I also needed to stay safe. All right, come in, I said reluctantly, stepping aside to let them enter. As they walked in, I couldn't help but feel that my life was about to take a turn into the unknown. The man and his companions stepped into my apartment, bringing an air of tension with them. They settled in my living room, their presence imposing and unnerving. The leader, the man I'd seen on the street, finally introduced himself. My name is John, he said. These are my associates, Sarah and Mark. We've been investigating a series of strange occurrences in this building. Investigating? What kind of occurrences? I asked, my curiosity now mixed with a sense of dread. John exchanged a glance with Sarah before continuing. People disappearing, unusual sounds, and sightings of shadowy figures. We believe your neighbors might have fallen victim to whatever is behind this. My heart sank. Mrs. Thompson's words now seemed like a dire warning I had failed to heed. What do you need from me? I asked, trying to remain composed. We need access to the building's basement, Sarah said, her voice calm but firm. We believe that's where everything is centered. The basement? Why didn't you just go there directly? I questioned. Mark spoke up for the first time, his tone grave. It's not that simple. The basement is locked and heavily secured. We need someone who lives here to help us get in. Reluctantly, I agreed to help. We made our way to the basement, my hands trembling as I unlocked the door. The air grew colder as we descended the stairs, each step echoing ominously in the confined space. The basement was dimly lit, filled with old furniture and forgotten relics. As we moved deeper, a sense of unease settled over me. John led the way, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. Suddenly, Sarah stopped, pointing at a section of the wall. There, she whispered. That's where we need to go. We approached the wall, and to my shock, John pressed a hidden switch, revealing a concealed door. Behind it, a narrow passageway extended into the darkness. What the hell is this? I muttered, my fear mounting. It's what we've been looking for, John replied. Stay close and keep quiet. We ventured into the passage, the walls closing in around us. The air was thick and musty, making it hard to breathe. After what felt like an eternity, we reached a large, open chamber. The sight before us was both astonishing and terrifying. In the center of the room stood an elaborate altar, surrounded by strange symbols and markings. It was clear that this was no ordinary basement. What is this place? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. It's where they perform their rituals, Mark said, his expression grim. We've been tracking this cult for years. They use buildings like yours as fronts for their activities. My mind reeled with the implications. My neighbors, the noises, the disappearances, it all made a horrifying kind of sense now. What do we do? I asked, feeling a mix of fear and determination. We need to destroy this place and find your neighbors if they're still alive, John said. But we have to be careful. They could come back at any moment. The chamber's oppressive atmosphere weighed heavily on us as we moved closer to the altar. Every step felt like a gamble with unseen forces lurking in the shadows. John, Sarah, and Mark spread out to search for any signs of the missing neighbors while I stayed near the entrance, keeping an anxious watch. Suddenly, Sarah's voice broke the silence. Over here, she called, her tone urgent. We rushed to her side and found a hidden compartment beneath the altar. Inside, bound and unconscious, were my neighbors. Relief and horror washed over me simultaneously. They were alive, but their condition was dire. We need to get them out of here, now, John said, his voice tense. But we have to be quick. If the cult returns. A sudden noise from the entrance made us all freeze. Footsteps echoed down the passage, growing louder with each passing second. They're coming, Mark hissed. We need to move, fast. We lifted the neighbors as gently as possible and began our hurried retreat. The footsteps were getting closer, almost upon us. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to stay focused. We couldn't afford to make any mistakes. As we reached the main basement area, the cultists appeared at the entrance, their faces hidden by dark hoods. They chanted in a low, menacing tone, advancing towards us with eerie precision. "Go! I'll hold them off," John shouted, pulling out a small firearm. "No, you can't," I protested, but he was already moving to intercept the cultists. "We don't have time to argue," Sarah snapped. "We need to get out, now." With heavy hearts, we left John behind, knowing he was buying us precious time. We made it to the stairwell and climbed as quickly as we could, the sounds of the struggle fading behind us. Once we reached the lobby, we called the police, frantically explaining the situation. The authorities arrived swiftly, and a team was sent down to the basement. We waited in tense silence, hoping for John's safe return. Minutes felt like hours, but finally, the police emerged with John, battered but alive. The cultists had been apprehended, their sinister operation dismantled. The following days were a blur of police reports and media attention. My neighbors were taken to the hospital and, thankfully, began to recover. The cult's hidden network was exposed, leading to a series of arrests across the city. As for John, Sarah, and Mark, they became local heroes, their relentless pursuit of the cult saving many lives. I, too, found myself hailed as a hero, though I felt more like a survivor of a nightmare. In the end, life slowly returned to normal, but I was forever changed. The rain on 6th Avenue now held a different significance, a reminder of the night that nearly cost me everything. I learned to cherish the mundane moments, finding solace in the ordinary. And as for the man who had waited for me that fateful night, I owed him and his team a debt of gratitude I could never fully repay. They had uncovered the darkness hidden beneath our everyday lives and brought light to where there was once only fear. It was a chilly evening on November 15, 2023, in San Francisco. I was driving back home from a late shift at the hospital, exhausted and longing for my bed. The streets were unusually quiet, the kind of eerie silence that makes you feel like you're being watched. The streetlights flickered occasionally, casting long, dancing shadows that added to the unsettling atmosphere. As I turned onto Lombard Street, the most crooked street in the world, I noticed a figure standing at the corner. At first, I thought it was a homeless person, but something about the way they stood, motionless and staring, made my skin crawl. They were barely visible under the dim light, just a silhouette, but their presence was oddly unsettling. I brushed off the feeling, attributing it to exhaustion, and continued driving. The city was usually alive, even at this hour, but tonight, it felt like a ghost town. My mind played tricks on me, making me think the figure was following me, appearing in every corner I turned. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, but there was nothing. When I reached my apartment, I parked the car and walked towards the entrance. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as if someone was watching me. I turned around quickly but saw nothing unusual. Just as I was about to enter my building, I heard a whisper. It was faint, but clear, "Help me." My heart raced as I scanned the area. There was no one in sight. The voice was so close, yet no one was there. I hurried inside, trying to shake off the feeling of dread that clung to me like a shadow. Later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard the whisper again, this time louder and more desperate. It seemed to come from inside my apartment. I froze, my mind racing with possibilities. Was it my imagination? Or was someone really in my home? I checked every room, every closet, under the bed, but found nothing. Yet the whisper persisted, haunting me. "Help me," it pleaded, sending chills down my spine. I tried to convince myself it was just my tired mind playing tricks on me, but deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. The next morning, as the sun began to timidly rise over the city, I met my best friend, Sarah, at Cafe Reveille on Columbus Avenue. It was our favorite spot, and the familiar smell of fresh coffee and baked goods brought a brief sense of normalcy. Sarah listened intently as I recounted the unsettling events of the previous night, her eyes widening with concern and disbelief. "Are you sure you heard that?" she asked, trying to hide the skepticism in her voice. Sarah had always been the more rational one, naturally skeptical and inclined to seek logical explanations. "I'm sure, Sarah," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. It wasn't just once, it was several times. And it sounded so real. She sighed, stirring her coffee upsetly. Look, you're exhausted. Working double shifts isn't easy. Maybe your mind is playing tricks on you. I knew she might be right, but something inside me couldn't accept such a simple explanation. I know, but it felt so real. What if it's not just my imagination? Sarah looked at me for a moment, then smiled softly. All right. I'll stay over at your place for a few nights. We'll see if anything happens. And, who knows, maybe you can finally get some rest. A flashback of our college days at UC Berkeley crossed my mind. We met there and became inseparable, sharing laughs, tears, and a strange knack for finding ourselves in creepy situations. Like the time we decided to explore an old abandoned house near campus, swearing we saw a shadow moving in the windows. Sarah had always been my rock, and I was grateful to have her by my side now. As I went about my day, the whispers lingered in my mind. It was as if a part of me knew something was terribly wrong, while another part fought to maintain rationality. I questioned my sanity, wondering if the stress from work and the lack of sleep were finally taking their toll on me. That evening, with Sarah by my side, I felt a bit more secure. We settled in to watch a movie, trying to keep things light and distract my mind. But my thoughts kept drifting back to the whispers. Help me, echoed in my head, making it hard to focus on anything else. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was trying to reach out to me. My rational mind fought against the possibility of anything supernatural, but a deeper, primal fear began to take root. Was I really losing my mind, or was there something more sinister at play? The uncertainty gnawed at me, making every shadow in the room seem like a potential threat. Sarah and I decided to take matters into our own hands. We spent the following day investigating the building, hoping to find some logical explanation for the eerie whispers. Our search led us to the basement, a dark and dusty place that seemed untouched for years. Amidst the cobwebs and old furniture, we found an old leather-bound diary. The name Emily was inscribed on the first page, along with the date, June 1950. Curiosity piqued, we began to read the diary. It belonged to a young woman named Emily who lived in the building decades ago. Her entries started innocently enough, describing her daily life, but soon took a dark turn. She wrote about feeling watched, hearing whispers, and eventually, her fear of a malevolent presence in the building. The entries stopped abruptly, leaving us to wonder what had happened to her. That night, the whispers grew louder and more frequent. They seemed to come from the basement, where we had found Emily's diary. Sleep eluded me as nightmares plagued my mind, all featuring Emily, trapped and calling for help. The dreams were so vivid, they felt more like memories than figments of my imagination. Sarah, ever the researcher, dug into local archives and found records of Emily's mysterious disappearance. She was last seen entering the building but never came out. The case was never solved, and her body was never found. It seemed we had stumbled upon a forgotten piece of the building's dark history. As days went by, the line between reality and illusion blurred. The whispers were constant now, a haunting soundtrack to my every waking moment. I felt like I was on the verge of losing my sanity, torn between believing in the supernatural and seeking a rational explanation. Sarah and I argued frequently. She wanted to stop the investigation, fearing for our safety, while I felt compelled to uncover the truth. We need to know what happened to her, I insisted, desperation creeping into my voice. She needs our help. Sarah sighed, her resolve weakening. All right, she conceded, but we need to be careful. We don't know what we're dealing with. Our investigation took a toll on both of us. The once strong bond we shared was now strained by fear and uncertainty. We were no longer just best friends, we were co-conspirators in unraveling a mystery that seemed to grow darker with each passing day. One night, Sarah and I ventured back into the basement, armed with flashlights and a sense of grim determination. The whispers were almost deafening, guiding us to a hidden corner behind a stack of old, forgotten furniture. As we moved the debris aside, we uncovered a small, rusted door. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached for the handle, the whispers intensifying, as if urging me to open it. Inside, we found a small, dark room that seemed to have been untouched for decades. The air was thick with the smell of decay. In the center of the room, we found an old, tattered mattress and chains bolted to the wall. My stomach churned as the horrifying reality set in. This was where Emily had been held captive. As we stood there, the room grew colder, and the whispers turned into anguished cries. Suddenly, a ghostly figure appeared before us. It was Emily, her translucent form chained to the wall, eyes wide with terror. She reached out to us, her mouth forming the words, "Help me." Sarah and I were paralyzed with fear, unable to move or speak. In that moment, the door behind us slammed shut, trapping us in the room with Emily's ghost. The temperature dropped further, and the cries grew louder, echoing off the walls. I could feel the despair and pain radiating from her, a palpable force that threatened to overwhelm us. Desperate to escape and help Emily find peace, we remembered the diary. Emily had written about a ritual that could free her spirit, something she had discovered in her final days. With shaking hands, I pulled the diary from my bag and flipped to the page detailing the ritual. It required a few simple items, candles, salt, and a personal belonging of Emily's, which we found among the dusty items in the basement. We quickly set up the ritual, placing candles in a circle and sprinkling salt around the room. Holding Emily's locket in my hand, I began to recite the words from the diary. As I spoke, the cries intensified, and the room seemed to shake. Sarah joined in, her voice steadying mine. As we completed the ritual, a bright light filled the room, and Emily's ghost began to fade. Her anguished cries turned to soft whispers of gratitude, the oppressive cold lifted, and the room returned to its musty stillness. The door behind us creaked open, and we stumbled out, gasping for breath. The whispers had ceased, and the building felt lighter, as if a heavy weight had been lifted. Emily was finally at peace, and we had survived the ordeal. Like the story? Hit like and subscribe. See you in the next story popping up on your screen at this exact moment.